I am related to Keith Sweat, though. That's really random. Keith Sweat, the like 90s R&B singer.
What
Who
song
can
would you
love
have?
you like me? Nobody.
It's been a long time coming. The tide is turning. We tired of running. We rising up. It's been a long time coming. They pride is hurting. Shake off that burden and that dirt in. Bounce.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Raj Nation Innovations Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. My name is Rajiv Nathan, aka The Raj Nation. I am your show's host. I'm the founder of Raj Nation Innovation, also a hip-hop artist and a yoga instructor. Above all else, I am a storyteller. I am joined by my co-host, Victoria Cohen, aka VC Money. Victoria is the voice behind the blog, almondsandasana.com. She is also a yoga instructor, a health, wellness, and fitness enthusiast. Above all else, she is an activist. This is Discover Your Inner Awesome, the only show where you get to eavesdrop on conversations with entrepreneurs, founders, artists, and musicians about the stories, the journeys, the struggles, but most importantly, the questions. The questions that help creative thinkers like you and I better understand who we are, what we're doing, and how we can do it better. We are at our Season 7 finale, folks. That's right. This is the season finale, and I could not be more excited than our guest for this one, who I joked with her before we started recording. Her name is Avriel Epps, and I told her she is the most prolific guest we have ever had on this show. Her resume is quite impressive. Avriel is a critically acclaimed R&B artist, including doing a track on the Grand Theft Auto soundtrack alongside other artists Action Bronson, Earl Sweatshirt, and more. She's even garnered the attention of Jay-Z's Life and Times magazine. She's more than that, though. She also is the founder of education tech startup SeekU and currently entering a PhD program at Harvard University. Yes, she does it all. And I am so excited to have this conversation with her, considering the work she's done in her studies and in her PhD program coming up now. We asked the question, how does your identity impact your experience? Before we dive in, quick reminder and invitation. Join our tribe over at www.discoveryourinnerawesome.com. Enter your email there and join our tribe. You will never miss another episode of the show. Every Monday, getting an email in your inbox when we release that week's episode. All right, let's dive in now to our conversation with Avriel Epps to close out Season 7. How does your identity impact your experience? Let's listen in.
I think about identity all the time. Ever since I've been little, I've been an artist, and I think the work of an artist is to really do a lot of deep exploration, and so that ends up causing you to think about like what's important to you, why other people treat you the way they treat you, why you treat other people the way you treat them, and that's really like the basis of good storytelling or human-centered storytelling. And then, being an artist and navigating creative industries as a kid and as a teenager really forced me to look at the way other people view me based on like my physical identity, being a woman of color, being a certain age, being tall and thin, or whatever those things are that people like identify me as, and then ascribe certain stereotypes to. And so, that was actually really frustrating to me as a kid. And when I got to college, I had an opportunity to start to understand on a macro level how identity works and how there are systems in place in our society to influence the way people navigate the world based on their identity. And I started doing research in that area, started writing more music that like further explores that, and started to develop a passion to help students, high schoolers, really understand their identities and be critical of identity and like not take these social constructs that we assume are real, like race and gender, sexuality, all these like things that humans have made up and decide to believe in, and like really critique them and not take them at face value, and not let them limit what each individual student is capable of achieving in their lives too. So identity just like influences people on a lot of different levels. I think as a woman of color, I think about it a lot more because people see my race and gender before they see me as a human being, but that might be the case for every single person in America, maybe even in the world. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about.
So that last line you said there, I'm a woman of color and people see me as that before they, get to know who I am or see me as a person. Can you talk through like some of the kind of barriers or struggles you went, like some of the specific struggles or experiences, you had, like with that kind of being the forefront of like, oh, woman and person of color before person?
Yeah. Man, as little, I mean, there's so many examples. Where do I start?
I don't know if that's good or bad. That's probably bad, right? There's so many examples.
Yeah. So I think the earliest memories I have of it really feeling like a hindrance to me, not necessarily like, oh, people notice that this is something about me, but it's actually like keeping me from an opportunity, is when I was modeling and acting as a teenager, or as like a preteen. And I had a runway agent who sent me out on a lot of like high fashion runway stuff, and that was perfectly fine. But then I also had a print agent, and so he was convinced that I didn't have a specific look to be to work for certain clients, and he like refused to send me out for jobs. And it came down to this idea that like Black models at that time, at least the trend was Black models that were working had really strong African features, and somebody with like, I guess, less African features, I don't even know how to phrase that, is like more commercial and like less appealing. You go out for like lower paying jobs or less prestigious jobs, and so that was really frustrating. But then when I got signed to my first record deal, and when I was 17, it was like in an imprint label under a major label. And I remember I was making really experimental pop music. And it was, I wanted to make things that were, I don't know what we associate with like alt-R&B today, but it was like 2006 or 7, and that wasn't like a trend in music yet. And I remember all the label executives telling me that like I should go more in the direction of Alicia Keys. And the only reason I could like justify that in my head was like, well, I guess I'm like light skinned and I've got curly hair and I sing and play the piano. So like they see me in this specific lane or this role that I should be in. I'm not sure. And then it got really blatant when they were telling me to do features on like rap artists. And I wasn't even like doing any kind of urban music at the time. It didn't make sense. It was like, okay, well, I'm Black. So then they're putting me in this like urban music box and telling me I have to follow this specific, pathway to success that they think works. But I mean, as an adult, it impacts me in all kinds of ways. We know that there are only, I think, 12 Black women who've ever raised more than $1 million in venture capital funding. Only 4 that have raised over $5 million. And so I take that with me anytime I go and meet with an investor for my startup. We know that there's housing discrimination is real. And so whenever I'm negotiating a lease for an office space or something like that, I'm cognizant of the discrimination that people have faced for, decades or centuries at this point, decades. But there are a lot of different things that you have to think about. It's not even necessarily blatant stuff, but just being mindful of ways that discrimination has been used against people like you in the past, and like being hyper vigilant and making sure that you're not falling prey to those same things.
The Alicia Keys point, you mentioned that. I was like, before you even said, the only reason I could think of, I was like, oh, because she's light skinned and has similar hair.
Exactly. It didn't make any sense.
So the reality is, for you, whereas Alicia Keys said, no one can get in the way of what I'm feeling. For you, it was someone did get in the way of what you were feeling.
Exactly.
And the point about being put as a guest or as a feature on rap songs, that's another interesting one too, for the fact that like I've always taken note that whenever you hear a non-rap popular-esque song by a Black artist, it's under the R&B genre.
Right.
But it's like if like Britney Spears or someone had come out with the same song, it wouldn't be R&B, it would be pop. you know?
Exactly.
Like even like I think like Destiny's Child was considered R&B in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like it's creating these categorical, creating these categories and putting these boxes around things, not necessarily for the reasons they were intended to, because obviously you have to, like, just in that example, you have to create categories of music, but it's less about like what does the music sound like and more about what does the person doing this music look like.
Well, do you experience that, Raj, as an Indian rapper?
I
I feel like maybe.
Well,
or just people being surprised.
They're more so
like
surprised.
it's an interesting combination.
Yes.
And so I feel like people probably judge that.
So I have a line in one of my songs I did a couple years ago, where I say,
I am kicking balls like you thinking this is soccer. You're brown and you rap, that's cool. Awkward, phonetic. Why you ain't a doctor? My brother did that. I took a gamble on a proctor.
That's hilarious.
and that's sort of like a lot of the responses I've gotten over time. But I will say it changed over time to the point where it was just like, who were the other people that were in my circles? Because it went from like, ooh, you're brown and you rap, like you can't do that, that's weird, to wait, how can I hear your music? Mm-hmm. And that just happened with like being around more artistic types, right, who look like, you know, anyone.
Right.
And then in the business world now with entrepreneurship, like everyone's like floored when I tell them that part, and they're like, "Wait, what? That's so cool!" Mm-hmm. And I recently decided one of my new projects is going to be an album about raising venture capital.
Amazing. Amazing. I want to listen to that. Drop some Major Keys, please.
Yeah, totally. So, so I think some of the premises that are coming out of this is this idea that, like, you know, what you look like precedes how you may actually act or talk or be, and it's even deeper rooted than like just the things of, okay, maybe only 13 black women have raised more than $1 million. It's like there are certain things that prevent people from getting a seat at the table, even, or getting into the conversation. It's because it's not like, you know, and that's I guess a more quote unquote like lucrative example, raising $1 million. But if you even take it many steps behind that and look at, someone did this experiment a few years ago where he sent out a bunch of job applications, or sent out a bunch of resumes, and he had a Hispanic name.
Yep.
And he only got like one callback. And then he sent out the same resume and changed the name to like a generic like John Smith or something like that. And he got callbacks. Yeah. And it's those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's really well documented in the literature too. It goes beyond just that single experiment.
And even go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, and even like J.K. Rowling was denied by dozens of publishers first, and they had told her that you should use the first off, they all said no one's going to want to read a woman's writing. Like young boys don't want to read a woman's writing. And then even the publisher that did bite on her, which Bloomsbury, I think it is. I mean, then they've made bank since then, obviously. They got a roller coaster out of it and a theme park. But they told her, what is it, Joanne something Rowling is her name, and they said use your initials so it's not obvious that you're female.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, it's like obviously these individual acts of prejudice or discrimination are important to look at, but then you have to take a step back and look at like systems that are in place that, as long as nobody is like actively critiquing those systems and just going along with the flow, these differences or these disparities will persist. So like, you know, the venture capital for Black women is important because obviously there's prejudice and bias involved in like the investors themselves. But beyond that, it's also like, you know, networks, who investors have access to, what entrepreneurs investors have access to in terms of deal flow. And like, if there aren't a lot of people of color or women in your network, you're not going to see those deals come through. And then also, you know, women or whoever is getting access to the jobs that allow people to have confidence to start tech companies or high growth companies. I mean, what we know about those women is that majority of them worked at tech companies before that. And So it's and that goes back to like educational opportunities, and there was a ton of systemic issues in education that that make these disparities persist. So yeah, I think it goes beyond like people seeing you and then only seeing your race, your gender, or whatever first, but it also has a lot to do with like systems that have been in place for centuries in this country.
So I think one thing that like I've noticed lately, being a yoga teacher and being in like the fitness world, not necessarily gender or race, but like physique and
body type.
Yeah, body type. So one, like I've definitely noticed people like, coming into my classes and kind of giving me that up and down of like, like, is she in shape? Like, could she really tell me what to do? They give you a certain look. And then like recently a teacher that we teach with, and I know she meant this in like the sweetest way, and I didn't take it in any sort of bad way, but it's just interesting. She was like, Victoria, if there was, a yoga teacher, if you looked up yoga teacher in the dictionary, I think you would show up right next to it. Like, you just look like a yoga teacher. And I'm like, really? Like, I don't feel like I'm like hippie enough to look like a yoga teacher. I'm like, I wonder what in her mind like a yoga teacher looks like, so it was just funny. Like, and it got me thinking like just about how we judge people from their physical appearance, even if it's not necessarily race or gender, but just, their body shape and their body type and whether they look like they exercise or not, or, whatever it might be. And then, determining if we think they're qualified to guide us in some way. And so that's just an interesting one I've kind of felt for the first time recently.
Yeah. Well, the irony with that is like when we think of yoga teacher in a Western context, we don't think of Indian man. Like,
which is exactly what they are.
And that's what I am. And I am a yoga teacher, and I'm in the minority of yoga teachers.
And you're like, I'm the OG
yeah,
yogi. They were
exactly.
all like me.
Exactly. So it's like the cultural appropriation and the whitewashing of yoga is also really an interesting thing, because like, yeah, we don't really critique that at all.
Right. I totally could have told her like, actually, it should be an Indian man.
Yeah. Oh, and I'll tell you, like, I'll have times where I'm like in some like random classes where the teacher will go off on this like, I don't know, this whatever Hindu philosophy concept. I'm just like, bitch, like, get off your high horse. Like, that's not what this is about.
So funny. So funny. I love it.
But I have noticed, I'm like, and it actually works to my advantage. So this is interesting, right? Because in the yoga, in the world of yoga teachers, me as a straight Indian man, I am a very, very, very small percent of the overall yoga teachers. So it actually makes me almost, not almost, I think it does. It makes me
a unicorn.
Yes, a unicorn of sorts, but more attractive to be hired by a studio because I am in that small percent. Like first off, there are not a whole lot of straight male yoga teachers, and then one layer beneath that is there are like hardly any Indian male and then Indian straight male yoga teachers.
So it gives you a little edge.
So like I think it's like in a world where there's if you're the definition of yoga teacher Victoria, where there's 100 Victorias, there's only one Raj in that world.
Yeah.
And so it's like the appropriation works in my advantage.
Well, that's like, and I thought about this.
Tokenizing you.
And I thought about this too because, like, so I studied engineering in college, and when I was looking at colleges, they were all offering like, scholarships and discounts, and like even just like it was like a discount of like apply, it's like $50 or $100 to apply, but it was like less if you applied to engineering as a girl because they just wanted to encourage girls to. So in it's interesting because while sometimes we think it's a disadvantage to be a quote unquote minority in whatever field you're in, sometimes it can also be an advantage nowadays when so many companies or studios, whatever, are looking for diversity, whether that's male, female, race, whatever it is, that sometimes if you're the unicorn, it can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that argument a lot, and I think the one thing you have to just like remind yourself of is like, why do those programs exist in the first place?
Oh, yes,
Right.
Like they wouldn't
absolutely.
exist if there
Absolutely.
wasn't an issue of
issue.
representation. And so like it's not really an advantage. Like then it's still a net negative when you look at the fact that like there aren't a lot of women engineers.
Oh, yeah,
and like
absolutely.
it's an advantage for the individuals who are trying to solve that problem. And I think those people should get compensated for that. Like if you're going to be the only girl in an engineering program and you're going to, or, one of a few girls in an engineering program, that's going to be a difficult space for you to navigate. And like, you should get help to do that,
Totally
or you
agree.
should get incentives to do that.
Well, and that kind of reminds me of, so like in that instance, like if you're the only girl, say in an engineering field, it's like your experience is you're not going to have the normative experience. Hence why, there should be something that supports you through that. But that kind of reminds me of these instances I see all the time where, and I don't know if you've faced this, Avriel, because you're in the subject group I'm about to talk about, so they probably wouldn't say it in front of you.
Okay.
I had another lyric about this in a song I did, and it was black people hang out here, it's fucking ghetto, but white people hang out there, fuck it, let's go. And the basis behind that was the number of times I have been with people who like we will maybe I'll suggest going somewhere and they'll be like, no, that part's ghetto, or like we'll drive past something, like that's ghetto right there. And really what they're saying is there's a congregation of people who don't look like me, therefore it is ghetto. And I've even had, and it's not like it's this overt like racist thing, right? It's more of like the subtle, not aware of your own bias type of thing. And
Right.
I've even had like friends of mine who are amazing people, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I went to this event. I was the only white guy there. It was so uncomfortable. And I'll have to be like, how do you think I feel when I go anywhere?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, like, because that's what I grew up in, I do feel comfortable. That's kind of like the point I'm trying to bring up. And has that ever happened to you, like the quote unquote, like the ghetto comment? Have you been around when that's happened?
Heck yeah. I mean, Black people say that about themselves all the time. But see, okay, here's the thing. You got to like realize where those terms come from again. Like if somebody is, say you do drive through a neighborhood and it's run down and people of color happen to live there, and it's like, that's an interesting thing that I see a lot of rundown neighborhoods where mostly people of color live. I wonder what's going on systemically to make that happen. And then instead of being like, oh, I don't want to go there because that's ghetto, and like, put some label on it, people should really be like, wow, why is this neighborhood so run down and there is nothing but people of color here? The city must not care about this community. And there must not be resources going to this community in the way that there are resources going to the other communities that I've seen. So like, I don't know. It's fine. I think it's fine for people to call out when there are differences in like levels of resources or the way something's a neighborhood's being taken care of, but then also to like question why that is and whether it or not it's right, rather than just say like, okay, this is like not a place that I want to be in, and that's those people's problem,
Yeah. I don't know if this is going at all off topic, but I'm going to just throw it out.
Welcome to the Discover Your
Okay,
Awesome
good.
podcast. The show where we have a topic and go off
so
topic.
Someone I know posted this article on Facebook, and I clicked on it and read it, and it was very interesting. So, not to be like white man bashing, sorry white guys out there, but it was basically, and I think it started because it was talking about Trump Jr. and how, he's this like almost like 40-year-old guy, and he's in a little bit of trouble, and he goes to his dad, and then everyone's sort of like, oh, that poor Donnie Jr., that he's just a nice sweet kid, he's trying his best, and whatever, he's a 40-year-old man with like multiple children, like, but we kind of play it down like, oh, he's just a young whippersnapper, he's figuring it out, and this is his first time doing this, whatever. But no, seriously, I mean, this article spelled it out a little bit more eloquently, and then it was sort of flipping things around and saying, meanwhile, a 12-year-old black kid was, shot and killed because he was playing with a toy gun in a park, and no one's talking about how he was just, or not no one's talking about, but, they're not, it's not the same argument of like, well, he's just a kid and he really is a kid. And then even with like women of, you never hear people say like, oh, girls will be girls, and oh, you know, she's a rascal girl, and well, what are you gonna do? So she might have a wandering eye, but that's just how girls are. No, that's not how it works. You know, the girl is like expected to be a woman and to be responsible and to, you know, get the guy, you know, in shape and to stop, you know, doing
not only be
silly,
responsible for
boyish
her
things.
Yeah.
Right. Not only to be responsible for herself, but also to be responsible for what every man around her might be thinking of her.
Yes, exactly.
No
because oh, those guys, you know, that's just in their nature. They can just sort of look and wonder, but yeah, exactly. So anyways, I read that earlier and I was just getting all heated up about it.
Well, that's interesting because there was a report that came out of Georgetown maybe a month or a month and a half ago about how Black girls as early as 5 are seen as less innocent than their white girl counterparts. Wow. And so like it shows up in the way that they're taught and the way that they, you know, teenage girls are interact with the police. It shows up in like every single level of society where there's just like, and this is where these like stereotypes come back into play, right? Where people see somebody and they automatically have this bias against them because it goes unchecked. And they don't critique what's going on in their brains about this person. So, I mean, that's like a well-documented thing now. And R.I.P. to Tamir Rice. That's the saddest, the 12-year-old boy that you were talking about. It's such a sad story.
Have you heard about this? Or I never actually have watched the show West Wing, but there's a clip I've seen from it about the bias of maps.
Oh yeah,
Are you familiar with this? So the idea is that, and I'm sure in the post-production I'll just put the actual clip in, but basically there is these people come to the White House to like actually like make a case for themselves about we want this change enacted in society, and this, I don't know, American Society of Cartographers or something like that, they come and they talk about how the standard map that is used, which I believe is the Mercator map, has inherent bias to it because it was designed to make navigation across oceans easy, but in so doing, it is basically like if you look at a map.
Look at Greenland.
Okay.
Now look at Africa.
Okay.
The two land masses appear to be roughly the same size.
Yes.
Would it blow your mind if I told you that Africa is in reality 14 times larger?
Salvatore Natoli of the National Council for Social Studies argues, in our society, we unconsciously equate size with importance and even power.
When third world countries are misrepresented, they're likely to be valued less.
And the point they were bringing up was that this inherently creates bias, because both top-down bias and size bias, because you generally equate things at the top to being more important. So America is super important.
Yeah, I think the argument around like making it easier for sea travel is like an interesting one to deconstruct as well, because like who knows if that's actually, I don't know if that's actually still true. I would question if that's actually still true, or if it serves us for navigational purposes to have the map in this way, or we just take it for granted now because it's been this way for so long. But it is interesting that like it could have, even if it was about sea travel, like why not have map be flipped upside down? Why are the countries with the brown people on the bottom?
Yeah. Yeah, and that was kind of in the episode, right? Like they're like, we propose flipping the map upside down, and, right. And you're like, and you look at it, and you're like, what?
It feels so strange,
yeah.
But that's a good experiment too, because that's how strange it should feel whenever you question any of your biases, and people are like so averse to doing it because it feels so uncomfortable. But it should feel that uncomfortable. Otherwise, like you're a slave to what you've been fed for, you know, your whole life and how you've been programmed your whole life. So people should have the willpower to do that.
That is a really good analogy, one line, or whatever you want to call it, but it should feel as uncomfortable as seeing the map upside down. I like that. So the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you in the first place was when I heard you on the Rich 20-something podcast. You mentioned a few notes that were around this, and I thought it was interesting, but the genesis was you made a name for yourself as an artist as a female under the name King Avriel. And there's a whole lot to unpack there, so I'm just going to let you launch into it.
Sure. So there are a couple different reasons why I called myself that. I think the biggest thing was just um, wanting to critique understanding of power as it relates to gender, and knowing that I think it was either like 15th dynasty or 18th dynasty in Egypt. There was a woman who was pharaoh, so she wasn't like the wife to Pharaoh or anything like that. Like she was Pharaoh. And when we look at, are you guys still there? Oh no.
Yeah.
No, we're here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I throw the mic on mute when you're talking, so there's no like
It's all
background
good.
whirring. Yeah.
It's all good. And so when we look at hierarchies, like within royalty, for instance, queens are always seen as below kings. And it's just gender. It's the way we look at gender. Like him always comes first before her. And I just wanted to play with that and turn that idea on its head. And then I also really love Bell Hooks, and Bell Hooks is like a Black feminist scholar, and she spells her name with 2 lowercase letters. And she has a couple different reasons for doing that, but the one that I identify with most is this idea that like she wants her work to speak for itself and not have it be about this individualistic identity of like, and names are individualistic like identity or denote individual identities. And so the A in my name was always lowercase, and the K in king was always uppercase, because it was, for me, this, call out to other women, like, look, we don't have to accept the way these hierarchies work. We can reclaim them and redefine them for ourselves.
What kind of responses did you get to that?
A lot of angry dudes on rap blogs.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
wow.
people telling me I look like a man, which is like, okay, whatever. And then like, dudes being like, I just don't understand why girls want to do this. But it was cool because I never got into arguments with people on rap blog comments. That's just like a losing battle. But I would see other men kind of jump in and debate the idea with them. And that made it all worth it for me, to be honest, was to just see men in these like predominantly male spaces discuss this amongst themselves. And some of them were like, really trying to understand where I was coming from and trying to like talk to their peers. It was cool.
That's dope.
And then, I got a lot of positive recognition for it too. It's like, at the time Vogue was writing a lot about trans identity and like gender fluidity. And so, they wrote a really cool piece on me, and I was one of the music videos that I released early on, really explored trans identity. And so it was cool. I think I got more love than hate, at least in terms of like magnitude of the message. So yeah.
How about, well, I'll say this. First off, trying to win an argument with an internet troll is always going to be a losing battle. Because they'll end up being like, well, I hate babies too, so there.
So yeah, I mean, I get in trouble on Facebook for this all the time because I won't argue with random people, but I'll argue with people I feel like I know or like I can have some kind of impact on.
And they're like, why are you coming at me?
Yeah, that too. But then they just don't stop. But I found out today that Facebook has a feature, instead of unfriending someone, you can like take a break from them and just make it so they don't see any of your posts. And I was like, yes, this is a godsend. So I don't have to actually like become, non-friends with people I still don't hate, but at least I don't have to deal with them saying crazy shit on my posts.
That's funny. Let's pause for a hot minute for this quick PSA. Are you part of the startup community? If so, keep listening. If not, go ahead and hit the skip ahead button, because this is not going to apply to you. The Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast is a property of Raj Nation Innovation. What is Raj Nation Innovation? Well, it's simple. I talk to founders and startup teams every day who flat out tell me, hey, we suck at telling our story. I help remove the suck, combining a unique background of both branding expertise as well as songwriting expertise from my experience as a hip-hop artist. I take a performance lens and mindset to the world of business communication. Using this approach, I partner with growth-focused startups to help them develop their story, their go-to-market message, and their pitch so they can raise venture capital and acquire their early customers. Think of me like the Will Smith character Hitch, but for startups. And yes, I will tell you when you're dancing like an idiot. Does this sound like a conversation we should have? If so, head to www.rajnationinnovation.com. That's rajnationinnovation.com. Send me a message through there, and let's chat. Back now to the podcast.
In this larger conversation around identity, one of the things I've noticed about myself is that depending on like the group of people I'm with, I can I'm still me, but I'll change my mannerisms a little bit. So like honestly, if I'm around like a lot of my black friends, like my voice will just be a tad different, and I'll say things more like nah instead of like no, like stuff like that. Or even like I know when I've traveled, like I if I were to move to another country, I honestly think give me less than 6 months and I'd be talking in that accent like out of habit. Like when I was in South Africa for 3 weeks, when I was interacting with the shopkeeper, I was putting on like a more South African accent. When I go to India, like
you just
sometimes
like
I talk
make up
in,
that you have a South African.
well, it's more, and I think my reason for doing this is like I want to fit in with this crowd and not be seen as like the outsider. Now, as someone who has studied this type of race relations and everything, please analyze this, Avriel.
It sounds like you're talking about code switching. So being biracial, I am the master code switcher. My friends and I joke all the time, specifically my boyfriend, that I have like cultural fluidity, meaning that I've been around just as many white people in my life as I have around, people of color. And so it's really easy for me to kind of switch back and forth. But that's an interesting thing that a lot of education scholars talk about too, in terms of like capital that students of color have that is untapped in the classroom and things that we don't see as being valuable. But being able to code switch and being able to authentically communicate with different types of people and different from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different locations is a really valuable skill that a lot of people of color have to learn out of necessity, right? To like be cool in their families, but then also go out into the working world and be able to like interact with white controlled spaces in like the corporate world or whatever, or in schools. So I think it's interesting. I don't know if I think sometimes it can be a little weird if it's inauthentic. Like, I don't know if one of my friends like comes up to me and just like starts talking differently to me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a totally different conversation. That's not code switching. That's just
racist. That's
just straight up racism. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't live in a country where people come here and try to like and orientalize us in any way, or like, people don't see Americans as these like interesting foreign people or anything like that. So I'd be interested to see how folks in like South Africa or India or wherever, like when Americans come there and do that, like what their take is on that.
Well, they're like, ooh, money.
Right.
Dollar signs.
Maybe it's as simple as that.
Okay, so you said that. So the code switching was the word you used, and that fluidity idea is interesting to me, because that's part of the reason why I think, in addition to personality, I think that's one of the reasons why The Rock is so successful, is because he's kind of racially ambiguous, right? Like there are like so many different groups of people can identify with him for the fact that he's this like beige tone, and then his personality is so goddamn charming that he's irresistible. I love you, Dwayne Johnson.
Are you going to vote for him as president?
Oh, if he runs for president, yeah. I mean, because at this point, everything's just a circus act, so.
Well, true. That's so funny. I want to know what his platform is.
Smell what The Rock is cooking. Anyways, the point there is like, and I think it was GQ that did an article on him that talked about this idea. I don't know if they used the word racially ambiguous, but they talked a little bit about that, about how like you're not quite sure what he could be Greek, he could be Italian, he could be black, he could be Hispanic, he could be Indian, he could be Middle Eastern. Basically, the only thing he couldn't be is like Irish.
Right.
Just super white.
Yeah, just like
Couldn't be
pasty. Yeah,
super white.
He's not Swedish. We know that
Right.
much.
and
But he might be. There might be some Swedish
But
in
there could be a
there.
little,
Sure.
maybe half.
and then in
maybe a
reality,
quarter.
he's African and Samoan. Like that's
Right.
what his actual thing is. So it's that idea is something that only I've become more aware of ever since I read that article, because I was like, I actually think for me, like that's actually plays more to that earlier point, Victoria, of like sometimes it does play to your advantage. Like I think it does play to my advantage. Like, yeah, I'm Indian, but like I'm not like such a deep skin color that like it's like, oh, you're afraid of me upon looking at me, which is a thing, right? Like
Yeah.
people see like dark, like just like the darker you get, the more dangerous potentially you are in the eyes of others. So it's like I've got this almost like
you're Indian, but you're not that Indian.
yeah, something like that going on. And I think it plays to my advantage. And then on top of that, like I can speak well. So I think it plays to my advantage in certain contexts, and it makes me something that I don't personally feel, in the business world, I'll say this, I don't personally feel like I have had opportunity taken from me because of my skin color. And I think there's a whole thing or two around like Indians being like a model minority, which is I think another thing we can explore. But that's kind of how I feel about it. Is like I'm not totally racially ambiguous, but I'm like more towards that end of being than as opposed to being like super whatever. And
Right.
I don't feel in the business world, and maybe I'm unaware of it, but I don't feel things have been taken from me or robbed of me because of my skin color.
There was a funny commercial, like, I don't know, a handful of years ago. It might have been like a tampon commercial or something. And it was like a racially ambiguous girl. And she was like, and in the commercial, she talks about how this is a tampon commercial and like you like it because I'm, wearing all white and I'm racially ambiguous. And
Hi, I'm a believably attractive 18 to 24-year-old female. You can relate to me because I'm racially ambiguous. And I'm in this tampon commercial because market research shows girls like you love girls like me. Don't all these angles make me seem dynamic? Now I'm going to tell you to buy something. Buy the same tampons I use because I'm wearing white pants and I have good hair. And you wish you could be me.
she calls she says that. I have to find it because it was really funny. And she was like, she could have been like Black or Asian or Middle Eastern. She it was kind of like The Rock. She was just like very racially ambiguous, but she called it out, and it was like a really funny thing because you notice that sometimes, a lot of times with models.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that it's similar for me too. Like being biracial and being light skinned, I definitely have privileges in comparison to darker skinned women, and you have to be cognizant of that too, right? So privilege is always unasked for and unearned. It's just a thing that is given to you because of something you were born into. So, and just because I sometimes benefited from being light skinned over, in comparison to somebody who's dark skinned, doesn't mean that that's right, or that like I want this social system to remain intact. Like it's still unfair, and even if it's not unfair to me personally, it's unfair to somebody who's my sister, and like that I feel like I have a responsibility to not benefit from it or to dismantle the systems that unfairly benefit me. But yeah, I mean that's a thing. That's how white supremacy works, and that's like colorism in the Black community is so real. And it stems from slavery, like house people from slave people. You know what I mean? I don't want to say the N-word on your show, but like
You can if you want. I mean, if you're comfortable saying.
It's all good. But like house slaves from field slaves, and like those tropes still plague the community to this day, and like what's deemed attractive and what's not, and like I don't know, it's really interesting. Color is a really interesting thing to look at because it's obviously a gradient. It's not black and white. There is a gradient, but then at the end of the day, like whiteness is still seen as this pure thing, and like it still looms above all else. And I think that's the thing that I'm most critical of.
You'll see too, even like, and I probably in the Black community, but definitely in the Indian community, in India in particular. First off, if you look at all of the Bollywood celebrities, all the film stars, they are lighter skinned Indian.
Mm-hmm.
There are some men who are darker skinned, but I think like dark man is more attractive than like across the board, like more attractive than dark woman. And there's also like there's a huge industry around skin lightening products as well.
Right.
Like
I always think that's so interesting when you go to other countries and you see that, or like, or that, you know, people really want to like cover up and protect themselves from the sun, and then here in the States,
it's like, yeah, here you got every white girl trying to get a tan.
Yeah. Like,
buying lifetime memberships to LA Tan.
Yeah. It is interesting though.
So is that idea of like the color spectrum and wanting to be more light and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but is that part of the Black community as well?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that all stems from like internalized racism too, right? So like you just, again, it's like white supremacy is the norm. It's the air that we breathe in, and if you don't critique it and if you don't examine it within yourself, then it takes over and you just accept things like light-skinned girls with curly hair are prettier than dark-skinned girls with kinkier hair. Like that, you know, and that's it's just a silly thing that we've made up. It's very arbitrary. And so when you really look at it, it makes zero sense. Like there's no like biological truth in that, you know. There's
and we all started off like super dark too, like as humans.
Right.
Right.
Like Jesus was not a white man.
Yeah.
Despite
have you ever heard
despite what Fox News wants us to think.
Right.
Have you actually ever heard the Rascast song? I think it's called Nature of the Threat.
No, I haven't.
So it's like a 10-minute rap song. A lot of it doesn't even rhyme, actually. And it's just like a 10-minute, like, it's almost like people's history of the United States, but like people's history of the world.
Oh, cool.
And he just kind of goes, like from the creation of man all the way to modern day, he talks through, like, what are the realities of what's actually happened in history, and the fact that, like, he's like, Jesus Christ's real name was Yahshua ben Yosef. Do people know this? He wasn't a white man. Do people know this? Do people know that Columbus hung Haitian pregnant women upside down and gutted their stomachs, like that kind? And we have Columbus Day in America.
Right.
Or that December 25th was actually Saturnalia in Greek culture, which was when basically the Greek men would get drunk and beat their wives. Or that
Jesus.
Yeah. Well, not
this
Jesus
is a
Christ.
grim song.
Oh, you're saying Jesus in the sense of like, oh man, not like Jesus Christ.
No.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like, wow.
Yeah, wow. That's what you're saying. Yeah. And then another thing he has in there too is, which like one of the funny lines is like, so like in Greek culture, like being homosexual or bisexual was the standard.
Great.
And he's like, he says, Julius Caesar was known as every woman's husband and every man's wife.
So this is and just like getting back to sort of the topic, right, of like, how does your identity shape your experience or define your experience? So just something that came into my head. So last week I was out in LA. That's where my brother and sister-in-law live, and they've got 3 little kids, and we are white, and my 2 nephews and niece are white, and their nanny is Black. And they live on a street where like there's a goofy thing where like you can't turn right down it going from one direction. It's just like silly. It's like really annoying, and I've totally broken the law and turned right there. But regardless, you're not supposed to. There's signs. But anyway, so so like early last week or something, their nanny Kalisha had called my sister-in-law and was like, hey, I think she was like, can you not turn right on that street? And my sister-in-law was like, no, you can't turn right. Like there's all these signs. And the nanny was like, well, I think I was just racially profiled because I got pulled over and, they gave me a ticket for it. My sister-in-law was like, no, I don't think so, because there are signs, like you're not allowed to. So, like whatever. Anyways, so then she got home and their nanny explained, she was like, no, what happened was they pulled me over, 3 cops. So one woman driving a car, and 3 kids in the back seat. So my 6-year-old nephew was like retelling the story too. And 3 cops pulled her over. And at first they just said something like, oh, we've had reports of this suspicious car driving around the neighborhood. And she's like, well, I mean, I work here. Like I literally work in that house right there. Like these are the kids that I nanny. And like whatever. And then I guess like after a few minutes, one of the other cops was like, we'll give her a ticket for turning right, because she wasn't supposed to do that. So like that wasn't the reason they didn't say that right off the bat. And then she was like, well, I mean, like, they were right in front of like my brother and sister-in-law's house. She's like, this is the house that I nanny, and like these are the kids, like, And they made her actually prove that by going into the house.
Wow.
And she was like, I mean, I can open the garage door too if you want. And they were like, no, it's fine.
Oh, she stole the code.
Just go in the house, you know? And so it's just interesting because at first, you know, like that natural instinct that, you know, my sister-in-law was like, no, I don't think you are racially profiled. Like, you're not allowed to turn there. And then, you know, obviously once she heard the story, she was like, oh,
you
shit.
are not allowed
Yeah,
to turn
exactly. And so, but it is just interesting how, like, that wouldn't have been my first reaction or my sister-in-law's first reaction as a white person to necessarily think that that's what was happening, but like obviously our experience, our identity would shape our experience differently than what their nanny's was. And she was like, no, I was being racially profiled, and like she totally was, you know. So it's just interesting how you can each see those scenarios differently based on your identity and your experience.
Well, yeah, and based on the privilege of like never having to experience that in the past, or like knowing that that's not a threat that you face. Because, I mean, I could drive, you know, my entire life and get pulled over, and if I haven't seen a single video of a cop killing a black woman for no reason, or if I haven't seen a single news report of a black shooting a black woman for no reason, I have no reason to fear police when they pull me over. But because I know that is a thing, and it's a thing that disproportionately affects people who look like me, I have to go through life with that fear. And like, I think that's one of the aspects of privilege, is just like the psychological privilege that goes along with navigating the world, knowing that things are set up to keep you safe rather than to threaten you.
I even had an experience similar to that a few months ago where I went to a concert. DMX was supposed to be playing, but he never showed up.
Rude.
Classic Earl Simmons.
Classic.
And so everyone anyways, like people left the venue like just pissed off and like in a frenzy. So like a bunch of squad cars, like the venue called the police to like manage crowd control. And my friend and I were just like, let's get an Uber. We had to like pick us up like 3 blocks away. So we wouldn't be in the midst of, you know, like the frenzy of everyone trying to move. And as we were walking there, like to the Uber, some scuffle had happened like where we were walking towards, that the cops had already settled. And then the cops were still in their car though, but then we were there and then just kind of like in their eyes loitering because we were waiting for our Uber. And the cop comes out of the car and starts asking questions. And I'm like, and in that moment I was like, fuck. Like, and my friend I'm with was white. And I'm like, shit might go down here. I got to be like super, super respectful. Because not that I'm an African-American man, but in the darkness, I am dark. I'm very dark. And I look much different than the person standing next to me. And, you know, nothing ended up happening, but, you know, it's like, we've got to be cognizant that something could happen because of an inherent color thing versus someone who is white does not have that inherent mindset of like, well, like I know they're police officers, so I should respect them regardless. But like, you're not having to think about
the same threat.
Yeah, you're not thinking about like, am I already at a disadvantage here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's one more topic I want to touch on, and then we'll dive into Seek You. And it is this idea. I've been gnawing on this a lot over the last couple months, and I've actually had conversations with different people to get their perspectives about it. And it is that I think as anyone who's not in a majority, so basically a white landowning male who can vote,
who's married to a woman,
a straight white wealthy man.
Sure. But so sitting, you know, in this podcast, we have Victoria, woman, part Jewish. We have me, Indian male, and we have Avriel, who is Black and Jewish and woman. And you won the lottery there, my friend. if this was Chappelle's show, racial draft, like I think the Chinese would select you. So, but the concept I've been gnawing on is the idea that, do the people who are not in the majority, do we have to think about our actions being representative of just ourselves versus the quote unquote people we represent? And the examples I can give are there was this video that surfaced online a few years ago about this black woman who was in line at a grocery store, and she had to pay with a check.
So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who's a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? Isn't it a nice day today? They're just chatting up, and says, yeah. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10, notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama.
So the kind of what I want to throw out there with that as the basis is, do you, Avriel or Victoria, like, do you ever look at like the things you do, the things you say, or the actions you take? Do you look at it as like you taking on the responsibility of representing more than just yourself? Or is it just like, no, I'm me, like I haven't even thought about what that means beyond myself?
Oh, I mean, definitely. Yeah, you have to be cognizant of that, because humans are social creatures. We live in communities, and we exist in communities. Like, we have to be responsible for one another, and we are responsible for what other people, for other people's actions and things like that too. So, but I think also, like, especially because I get afraid. I'm afraid to be pegged as like the angry black woman all the time, because I speak out against injustice and systemic racism, like, in everything that I do.
Like it's your job,
which
it is.
Yeah, basically. And so it's like, but at the end of the day, like, dude, if this was happening to you, you'd be pissed off too. Like, I think it's a rational, like, human reaction to be upset about the fact that you were born into a situation that you have very little control over, where because of, other people's actions in the past and in the present, you're at a disadvantage. Like, I think it's like, you'd be insane if you weren't. I think it's insane for people to not be upset about this. And so, yeah, like, I don't give a fuck. I'm angry sometimes. This shit makes me mad. And I think I'm in the right. And it's like, I try not to be angry at individual people if they're not acting with malintent. I try to be angry at systems, and I try to provide solutions and hold systems accountable and hold the people who exist within those systems accountable, because I'm much more committed to progress and social, racial, and gender justice than I am attached to being angry at any individual person, or like being seen as a victim, or people taking pity on me, or anything like that. So I think, yeah, at the end of the day, you just got to, like, ask yourself, like, what are you committed to? Like, if you're committed to getting stuff changed, and you're committed to everyone living in a more equitable world, and everyone being seen for and being able to experience their full humanity, then, sometimes you got to play up to some stereotypes and, like, not beat yourself up about it.
and not necessarily worry about, is that representing the larger.
And yeah, exactly. I got away from your original topic. I'm sorry. Yes. I think that's the problem with, that's something that I don't have control over, right? So again, that's the privilege of whiteness to the privilege of maleness, is that you don't get lumped in with your entire group, or one person's actions are not representative of the entire group. And so, like, I don't have control over the fact that people see me as a representative when I'm the only person of color in the group, or I'm the only person of color that they know, or the only person of color that they're talking to about these issues. Like, I don't have control over that. So I can't like, if I try to be cognizant of that and let that hinder or constrict me while I'm navigating these conversations or while I'm navigating like difficult situations, I am like, I'm not doing my best work then, you know, and I'm letting these systems win.
Yeah, I've definitely been in like a couple, you know, situations where you're cognizant of the fact that like, oh, I don't want them to think that I'm just like like being girly and complaining because I'm a girl and making a big, you know what I mean, making a big deal of it, or like, so totally different situation, but which is one that kind of comes to mind. I went to like a super Southern conservative Republican school, and I'm like
the opposite,
atheist and really liberal. And like, I started in 2007. So like, you know, Obama's election, I was like, I think I was the only person at school who voted for him. No, but like, you know, but I remember having to be really cognizant about that in certain group settings. Like, I'm political. I like to debate people. I'm, you know, generally like somewhat fairly knowledgeable on a lot of topics. And like, I like to be pushed. I like to push people, but I felt very much like being in the minority in that regard, that like I was not, you know, there weren't other people that were like on my side. I also didn't want to like sound sometimes too crazy and loud and getting so heated, because then it was like, you know, oh, well, you're just a crazy liberal and you're, you know, yada yada. So, you know, that's just kind of one scenario, but I think, but more on like the female side, because I feel like you get that like, oh, she's just being a bitch, crazy girl, she's a bitch, she's like, oh, she needs to rein it in, like, you know, that whole thing.
Yeah, the resigning belief, bitch is crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's also why it's so important to find allies, right?
Yeah.
So like, if you have somebody who it can't be pegged into that group, who's also saying the same thing as you to back you up, or not even saying the same thing as you, but like standing up for you, that is so powerful. And yes. I try really hard to surround myself with men and white people and like, you know, other people of color who experience privilege on some level, who also understand this and like are willing to advocate for me, and knowing that I'm like willing to advocate for them when they need me to too. So yeah, that's definitely a call for allies, because that shouldn't be something that like women being crazy or being seen as irrational or emotional shouldn't be a battle that only women fight against, because that's how we lose. So, you
know, I've only become more aware of the sort of like the representing the larger group thing, I think, more recently, because before I operated under the lens of like, no, like I'm me, like that's it, whatever. It's like I just happen to be Indian, something like that, you know, something to that effect. But over the last few years, I've become more aware of it, and I would say specifically over the last probably 6 months to a year, just in like little things, like, you know, like all growing up, I think for the reason of like just wanting to like be cool with people and fit in. It's like I'd like let people get away with, you know, like little comments here and there, or like doing the Indian accent to me as if I'm not familiar with what it sounds like.
Oh my gosh.
You know, that kind of stuff. What's that?
I said, I'm so sorry. Those kinds of microaggressions are just like the worst. They're so annoying.
Microaggressions, those kinds of things. And then I think probably like a little bit after college, I got to a point where I was like, all right, I think I'm like sure enough of myself and confident enough of myself to say something back. Where, like, and I'll tell you the classic example, for a few years when like the Big Bang Theory was at its height, I'd have people be like, you know who you look like? And I'm like, who? You know, like Raj from the Big Bang Theory. I'm like, I know I have like the same name, but and then I'd be like, oh, I'm not familiar with the show. Does he have a beard? No. And then at this time I had super short hair. I was like, does he have really short hair? No. And like, let's say I was wearing glasses at the moment. Does he wear glasses? No. Oh, well then you look like every white person I've ever seen.
I have my own version of that game when people ask me, what am I? It's the best. I'm like, I'm a human. They're like, no, like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from LA. Where your parents from? I'm like, oh, they grew up in LA too. Like, but like you're there's something. Like, what's your nationality? I'm American. Like, it's the big thing.
Can you get them to 20 questions? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Then finally it's like, oh, well, like, what's your heritage? And then at that point I'll just be like, I don't know. Oh, no. So I went to London and somebody was like asking me where my dad was from. I was like, well, my mom's Jewish, but I'm an American. My dad's like black. He's like, but what kind of black? Like, where's your dad from? I guess he wanted me to like pinpoint the
best
African
kind.
Yeah. And I was like, well, let me tell you about this thing called American slavery and
Oh my
the
God.
transatlantic slave trade. I actually don't know where my dad is from. It was really funny.
Oh man.
He was very uncomfortable.
Well, and more recently, so like a couple of weeks ago, I taught a yoga class that was a Bollywood flow yoga class, which was a ton of fun.
I know, I'm so bummed I missed that.
And it was basically like a dance party, like with yoga involved, or it was a yoga class with a dance party involved. I think would be a better way to phrase it. But I was like really cognizant of like it's really easy in those scenarios. Like as an Indian, it's very easy in those scenarios to like play up to the stereotype because like you want to be like funny with it and everything like that. But like, as advice to me from someone else who was Indian, she was like, you shouldn't like do like the, like the move people are like screw in the light bulb, open the doorknob, like that dance move or whatever. I don't know if you can picture
Raj
that, Avriel.
just did it, so I know
like,
what he's talking
like
about.
you've got like one arm up
Yeah.
and you're screwing in a light bulb, and then another arm in front of you.
I've seen
turning the
Bollywood
doorknob.
movies.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
I never
She's
heard it
like-
explained like that.
She's like, don't do that because like don't like give that cue because that's just like so stereotypical and so cliche and that kind of stuff. And I didn't. And we incorporated some other stuff, and then also like I would take like a couple of the songs. I'd be like, this is what they're talking about in this song. It's actually like the Hindi version of Hakuna Matata. It's the same type of theme. And basically, like what I was trying to do was like be like give it the respect it deserves, as opposed to taking it like because it's really easy to take it in the opposite direction and be like, oh, like I'm gonna like dress like and wear a turban and do all this stuff, and like be like, oh, welcome to that kind of stuff, and be apu about it. But that's the stuff that I'm more aware of now, and it's not so much that like I personally get offended by much because I honestly think I built up immunity to getting offended. It's more that like with that like Big Bang Theory comment, like it's not that it offended me. It's that I want them to know you don't know who it's going to offend, so you probably shouldn't say that to someone you just met.
Well, not even that. I think like I sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that we have to just be careful not to flatten human beings. Like you can't, and that goes back to this like angry black woman stereotype or whatever stereotype we're looking at. When you do that, when you stereotype an entire group of people or you see them as all being the same, you rob them of their humanity in some way because they end up becoming this like flattened cartoon. And then it's really hard to understand how how institutions or systems disadvantage folks. Like it's easy to justify oppression when you see people as when you don't see people as people. And so I think that's kind of like where these arguments around like stereotyping or like even cultural appropriation, it's like you're turning entire groups of human beings, sometimes millions or billions of human beings, into like a cartoon or a flattened image. And then it just makes it that much easier to not really give a shit about them.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Flat.
No, it is.
Flat.
And it's just like
cartoons, it makes sense.
just the way you said it. I mean, it's like we all know that, but just it's a good way to articulate it.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have dedicated scholarly studies to this topic.
It's almost like you're an expert in this.
I don't know if I'm an expert yet.
It's almost like you had a journal, published in an academic journal on a topic related to this.
Basically. Oh yeah, I did do that. My bad.
All right, so let's transition here for a few minutes. Although I quite honestly feel like we could just keep talking for hours about this, but we do all have days to get back to. So let's talk about CQ for a minute. So as I mentioned before we started recording, I think hands down you are the most accomplished guest we've ever had on this show, with a background that includes being at UCLA, also being taking your scholarship money, building your own recording studio, and self-funding your own R&B album, and then getting on the Grand Theft Auto soundtrack. Were you on Action Bronson's song, or you just were also on the same album as him?
No, I was just on the same album as him.
Okay. But I think you've done some songs with some pretty well-known names, right?
Yeah. A couple.
Do you want to name drop for us?
I think probably, I mean, the biggest name artist that I've actually been on a song with is A$AP Berg.
Nice.
But yeah, I don't know how notable that necessarily is.
In the rap community,
How much
that's
I want to
notable.
play into that.
Yeah. And by the way, whether that was by choice or not, you ended up on a rap song.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. And so that's what happens when you take corporate money. You have to do something. That's why I didn't want to keep going down that road.
Your history has also included leading diversity initiatives and change management or diversity change initiatives for the entrepreneurship program at UCLA. You're going to Harvard. You're starting a postgraduate program at Harvard in a couple weeks, or by the time this goes live, you'll have started. But your main venture now is Seek You, which is really about helping high school students get into college. Now, that's what it is at surface level, but I know it's more than that. So tell our listeners why it's about so much more than just getting into college.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I did a lot of, when I was at the UCLA Graduate School of Education, I worked on some research that was looking at effective college counseling practices in California high schools. And so we took like 16 years worth of data and looking at like over 20 of the state's most effective college counselors and tried to figure out like what they were doing to help kids who were extremely disadvantaged get into school at really high rates. And they were like helping them beat the odds. And so then I took that and started to create some curriculum and tested it over the last 4 years or so. And now we have a tech platform that helps students navigate the process and then also connects them on demand to college counselors over video chat. But yeah, I think it's definitely more than being about helping kids get into college. That's college is a means to an end. So what we really help students focus on is figuring out who they are and who they want to become. And then if they see college as a bridge to help, or as a bridge to connect those two selves, like the present self and their idealized future self, then we help them get to college with that in mind. But that's not necessarily every student's goal, and it doesn't have to be. But it really is, the focus really is for us on self-discovery and like building empowering identities for students and helping them understand how they can contribute meaningfully to the world after they graduate from high school.
What, do you have any examples of like specific students who have gone through the training and then, gotten into a specific university or had a specific, great result?
Yeah, sure. So one student that sticks out in my mind, like one of my favorite students actually, is this kid Cole. He was he went to one school. He had like a congenital heart disease, but also got pushed out of the school after he had like recovered. And he'd like had open heart surgery as a teenager, which is like super traumatic. But he got pushed out of the school and then had to enroll in another school that was a lot more diverse than the school that he was in originally. And it was just really cool to watch him come into this consciousness and like really understand how schools that are maybe just even a mile apart from each other in Los Angeles could just have such radically different student bodies. And then the way that those student bodies are like treated is so different, and the resources allocated to those folks are so different. And it really lit a fire under him, and he like became student body president. He ended up interning for the mayor. He ended up at Berkeley studying political science, which is such a great fit for him because Berkeley has this tradition of radical politics, and so for that reason, I think he got to come into his own because those ideas of like injustice were kind of budding when he was in high school. But he's an interesting kid. And then another kid I had a lot of fun with because sometimes, not every kid's political and like not every kid wants to change the world necessarily, which is totally fine. I had another student who ended up getting into Harvard, but his application was so interesting because he did stand-up comedy. He really wanted to be a comedian. And his approach to stand-up comedy was so intriguing, where he really saw it as like nonverbal communication rather than verbal communication, which is like, of course comedy is about the jokes you're telling, it's about the words that are coming out of your mouth. But he had this analysis, and he had it down to a science of how he used nonverbal communication to get the laughs, and how he studied the greatest comedians on stage and the way their eyes shifted and their hands moved and where they stopped on the stage. And he just had taken such great care to think about nonverbal communication. And I think, any kid could write about like a hobby that they do outside of school, but he took it to another level where he really intellectualized it, and we helped him really understand how that applies to other aspects of life too. Nonverbal communication is so important in like all other aspects of life. And so he's doing really well at Harvard right now, and it's really fun to see him grow too.
So I'm curious, so how is it, what is the process for helping these kids find their purpose or, who they are, their identity? What is that process for you guys?
So our curriculum is like 12 modules right now. And it starts off with helping students really understand kind of the myths of the application process and the myths around college, because there's so much misinformation out there. And even at the school level, like their counselors and their teachers are giving them bad information sometimes, depending on what schools they're going to. And then, or their counselors aren't giving them any information, because in California, the counselor to student ratio is like 940 something to 1. Mm-hmm. So it's like some kids don't even get a chance to see their counselors. And so we start off with addressing those myths. Then we really help them take stock of everything they've been involved in. And it's amazing how much high schoolers will downplay themselves. Just not really take seriously some of the opportunities they've had, or like not see the strengths or the skills that they've built in doing something as mundane as like babysitting their little brothers and sisters after school, or like taking a job because they have to help contribute to the bills at home. So we help them really understand the value in all of their experiences over the last, 3 or 4 years. And then we lead them through a series of explorative exercises, journaling, things where they start to put into really concise language why it is that they do what they do. I really love Simon Sinek, and he has like a TED talk about like, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. And every kid like watches that and starts to understand that. We talk about like personal branding and how, if Nike has a brand, you have a brand, and like how to really think about your brand and how you want to communicate or articulate your brand. And then we teach them life skills like networking. So how do you connect with key stakeholders at the universities that you're interested in? And how do you learn how to talk to adults over email and over the phone in a way that's like convincing and persuasive? And then we also teach them how to advocate for themselves. So how to request a letter of recommendation in a really empowering way, where you are asking for the things that you know are going to support your application, rather than just saying, hey, can you write me a letter, and like hoping that it's good. And then obviously, filling out the applications, writing the personal statements. There's so many activities that go into that. But again, I think at the end of the day, it's really helping students, asking the right questions of students, because they have the answers inside of them already. And just being persistent in asking questions and making them ask these questions of themselves, so that they come to these answers. And it's not adults telling teenagers what they should be writing in their applications. It's more so them discovering what it is they want to highlight about themselves, what they love about themselves.
Cool.
How do you intend to? I'm sure you have a way. How do you intend to also attend Harvard while running this company?
I was actually thinking about that earlier. I was like, man, she's going to be busy.
Well, I have a lot of help. I have, my team is awesome. They're amazing. A lot of our processes are automated. And yeah, it's going to be a struggle. Like, nothing in my life is easy. And like, as soon as I get to a place where I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I can do this. Like, I have this inner drive in me to attack on another challenge and just test my limits. Mm-hmm. So this might be the time where I finally test my limits and I realize I can't do it, which is fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not afraid to fail, but I definitely want to try. I don't want to just like give up. And if CQ doesn't grow as quickly as I want it to, or as I project it to, that's fine with me as well, because the work that I'm doing, even if we're just reaching 100 students a year, is still worth it to me. But I do think that, universities are great places for entrepreneurs, because there are so many resources available and so much free access to stuff when you're a student as well. So I definitely plan on taking advantage of those resources.
Nice. Awesome. All right. So where can our listeners find CQ, learn more about it, and get in touch with you if they'd like to?
Yeah, definitely. So our website is SeekU, like Seeku University, SEEKU.co. And I'm always available over email or LinkedIn. It's just Avriel at seeku.co, or you can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I try to respond to everybody.
Awesome. All right, so let's bring this home and wrap up here. So our topic question today was, how does your identity impact your experience? We'll start with Victoria and we'll close with you, Avriel. Victoria, how does your identity impact your experience?
This is hard. But I mean, I think it does impact your experience.
It wasn't a yes or no question. It was a how.
I think that when we obviously all experience things differently because we walk through the world with different identities. That's the whole point of what we're talking about. So I think that one way you can start to see and experience things outside of your own identity is just to become aware, sort of like we were talking about, of the privileges and the advantages that you have, or maybe the privileges and advantages that other people have, and knowing that often it's a systemic issue, right? So I think just trying to become really aware of I think the privileges that you have as you walk through life will help to gain new perspective as you walk into a different experience.
My answer, how does your identity impact your experience? Well, I think experience is shaped by your identity, and what really goes into that is the fact that yes, there is how others see you, and that's going to play a big role into it. But the better you can see yourself, the better others are going to see you, and the better your experience will be. And that kind of plays in a little bit to what you're doing with SeekU, is helping these kids see themselves better so they can get greater results in the end, Avriel. But that's what I think it comes down to is, there are certain things you can't control. But if you see yourself as I'm just the poor, rundown, whatever, or I'm just the kid who can't hack it, whatever it might be, other people you're not going to have a chance that other people see you as something more than that. Avriel, how does your identity impact your experience?
This is a really broad question, but I like what both of you guys have already said, so I'm definitely going to second that. But I think for me personally, it has given me a sense of responsibility and given me a sense of purpose in my life. I forget whose quote it is, and maybe you guys can find it in post, but there's somebody who said something along the lines of the experience of Black America is the conscience of America, and how conscious America is directly related to how well African Americans are treated. And so I feel like my identity draws me or calls me to help America be greater, like not in like a Trump sense, but like really help not in a MAGA way at all, but like
not
really help America help America live up to its potential to really be a place where every person has equal opportunity to succeed and be great and fulfill on their human potential, because we all benefit when that happens.
Avriel Epps, King Avriel, cultural lottery ticket winner. I'm really glad we could have a conversation that I think a lot of people are terrified to have, and have so many laughs throughout it.
True, yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
That wraps up our conversation with Avriel Epps. Avriel, thank you so much for joining us. I absolutely loved not only being in the moment for that conversation, but then even now listening back to it in post-production. Just so good. I know I'm going to archive that one and listen to it 100 times more in the future. Did you, the listener, enjoy the episode as much as I did? If so, the best compliment you can give us is a rating and review on iTunes. Ratings and reviews help more people find the show, and therefore more people get to discover their inner awesome. It only takes 20 seconds. We will be forever grateful if you could do so. While you're leaving that review, go ahead and subscribe to the show on whatever platform it is you listen to, whether it is iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or the various other podcasting platforms in which this show is available. For full show notes, references, and resources, as well as Avriel's contact information, you can grab it all at www.discoveryourinnerawesome.com. And for this episode in particular, there's a ton of good references that we dropped in this episode, and they're all listed in the show notes, as well as the full-length clips that you heard samples of that we put into this episode. Guess what? While you're on our website, we have a nearly 100-episode archive of past episodes. Check them all out, because you're going to need a little something here to catch you through this mini break we are taking, as we have now reached the finale of Season 7. Avriel, thank you again for closing out the season, rounding out the season for us. We will be back in about a month. This is currently the end of August 2017. We'll be back in late September, early October 2017 with more awesome guests, more awesome topics, more awesome laughs and deep discussion, and just all around more awesome. Thank you again to Avriel Epps for joining us. For Victoria Cohen, I am Raj Nation. You have been listening to the Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast for this season and for all of Season 7. We will see you next time when we kick off Season 8. But in the meantime, take care and be awesome today.
It's been a long time coming. The tide is turning. We tired of running. We rising up. It's been a long time coming. They pride is certain. Shake off that burden. We rising up. It's been a long time coming. They tried to ignore it. This fight is urgent.